They kept filling into the bedroom until there was nowhere left to stand. 25 of them, maybe more, crammed in shoulder to shoulder. The air was already thick and warm from too many bodies in one tiny space. The cameras were up and nobody said a word. Every set of eyes in that room was locked on the woman lying on the bed. They had been waiting weeks for this night, and as they stood there in the silence, the room began to feel off. The air turned cold. The lights began to flicker. Every person in that room could sense it deep in their gut that something was coming. My name's Luke from SpareKey, and this is the true story of Doris Bither. Doris did not have an easy childhood. She was cast out of her family home as a teenager because, according to her son in later discussions, she was rebellious and wild. In her teen years, she would use Ouija boards and sit in on seances. This started out innocently enough, a party trick of sorts. But slowly, this party trick became a deep-seated obsession. Her adult years weren't much better. By Taff's account, Doris had fallen heavily into alcoholism, poverty, and a string of abusive relationships. This left her raising 4 children alone through all of it. The way he told it, their whole life was chaos, from one bad thing to the next. Finally, in the summer of 1974, Doris moved her family from Santa Monica to a small rental in Culver City. So this next part can't be officially confirmed. There is sources out there, but they're weak, to tell you the truth. So basically, according to some retellings of the story, shortly after Doris and her family moves in, there's a knock on her door. And there's this old woman that's standing there that tells Doris that she used to live on the land as a child, back when it was all still farmland. And in her words, the land was evil. That Doris needs to move her and her family out of that land because they're not safe there. But still, the record of this woman is very thin. I couldn't find much on it or verify its factual accuracy, but the thought of it still gives me the chills, so I wanted to include it. Doris had reportedly experienced strange activity throughout her life, but this was unlike anything she could have ever imagined. As Doris described it, there were 3 entities. 2 of them were smaller and they would hold her down, while the third one would assault her brutally in ways that I just don't want to go into detail about. As a result of the assault, she suffered deep bruising on her thighs, her wrists, and her throat. This was later observed by researchers, though it was never quite determined what had actually caused it. And it wasn't just her. Her children reported pushing, scratching, and biting. All 4 of them experienced these attacks. One of her sons, Brian, who was 13 at the time, tried to step in during one of the violent attacks on his mother, and he was thrown across the room with incredible force. The children didn't just feel these things, they saw them. Shadowy, fog-like figures that they would later describe as like a human, but not quite. One of them, they gave a name. A figure that would just roam the house. They called him Mr. Who's It. By the end of that summer, August 1974, in Westwood Village, 2 young researchers from UCLA's parapsychology lab were browsing a bookstore. Their names were Barry Taff, a doctoral student, and Kerry Gaynor, a research assistant. For reference, parapsychology is the study of paranormal or psychic events that don't have an accepted scientific explanation. This started as just a normal outing, 2 young colleagues talking about what all colleagues talk about, work, until someone approached them. The records are a little unclear as to who. Taff's own account claimed a friend of Doris who overheard their conversation and had asked for help on her behalf, while UCLA's magazine, written 50 years later, claimed it was Doris herself. Either way, Taff and Gaynor were intrigued, and on August 22nd, 1974, they knocked on the door of the rental house in Culver City. Once they settled in, they handed Doris a 16-page questionnaire, half of which she refused to answer. She wouldn't even give them her age. Years later, Taff admitted that if he pushed her about her past, the drinking, the abusive men, all of it, she would have shut them down and thrown them out, and they knew it. So they didn't push. Here's the thing. The physical assaults on Doris all happened before they ever showed up. There was nothing left for them to measure, no way to study something that was already over and done with. Instead, they decided to aim their investigation at the house itself, and whatever was still active inside of it. When they had come back a second time, this is when things really started to pick up. They made their way to the first room, the kitchen. Almost immediately, as if something had sensed they were there, a frying pan came flying out of a closed cupboard straight at them. Shaken but curious, they took the cupboard apart to see if there was some kind of mechanism that could have caused it, but there wasn't. That's not it. Strange things kept happening, small, but there. Objects would move when no one was near, and baseball cards would fly around the room when music played, and still, they kept coming back for 10 whole weeks. So over that stretch, around 30 people rotate through Doris's small house. A combination of students, researchers, colleagues, photographers from the lab, all of them wanting to see it for themselves. They reported balls of light, cold spots when every window was shut, and foul odors that came from nowhere. The balls of light would actually respond to Gaynor. They would grow, fade, and even move on request when he'd spoken to them. The team brought cameras. They brought a Polaroid SX70 and a 35mm Pentax. The Pentax was loaded with a high-speed infrared film. The film had gotten ruined by their own carelessness before they were even able to capture anything. The Polaroid was still working though, so they rigged the controls for the photo sessions. They hung black poster boards on the walls laid out by tape grids, and they set orientation markers. Then came the night they were building towards. They asked Doris to provoke it, to stand in a room full of people and deliberately call the thing out. So Doris spoke into the dark, and she told it to come out. A green mist bled into the corner of the room and dragged itself up into a faceless torso, broad and muscular, just hanging there in the air in front of every single person in that room. That was the moment a grown man, a research assistant, took one look at it and dropped to the floor where he stood. In a room that packed, with photographers standing right there, someone should have caught a photo of the torso. Not one person did. What they did catch was an arc of light, on this night and several others. The most famous photograph from the investigation shows Doris on the bed, surrounded by people watching, and a smooth, bright arc suspended in the air above her. Taff claimed that one arc crossed a 90-degree corner of the room without bending. Light reflecting or projected onto a wall would bend at that corner. So to Taff, that meant it couldn't be on a wall at all. As far as he was concerned, it was hanging in the air right over her. After those 10 weeks, the investigation didn't so much end as it just kind of fell apart. Doris had moved on. The team slowly lost track of her, and no final report was ever filed. There was no conclusion, No official answer. The whole thing silently just fizzled out. For decades after, almost nothing was heard about Doris at all. Then, in 2009, her middle son, Brian Harris, who was 13 when this all had happened, finally sat down with interviewers and gave his account of the whole thing. On the record, he confirmed the attacks. He gave details of how all 4 children experienced it. He mentioned the fog-like figures and the assaults on his mother by something no one could see. As solid as this all sounds, like everything else in the case, there are contradictions that create doubt. Taff only counted 3 entities. Brian claimed there were 4, bringing back Mr. Who's It, the one that roamed the house. Brian said he believed it was his own grandfather. The interviewer speaking with Brian noted that his account had shifted, that he contradicted himself here and there. Some parts of his story, though, were backed up by his brothers. The 2 other brothers added something else. The strange activity didn't start in that house. It had been following Doris for years before the move. Nothing as severe as what had happened in Culver City, though, but it was there. And just when you think the case is airtight, it gets picked apart. An investigator named Kenny Biddle studied the famous photographs piece by piece. He agreed that the arc didn't bend at the corner, but he pointed out that the arc also passes in front of other people's heads, with one even crossing a woman's face. That would mean that the light was between the group and the camera lens, not floating over the bed at all. He also noticed something important was missing: Taff's poster boards, tape grids, and orientation markers. All the controls he'd set up beforehand. None of them were visible. In every published photo from that session, not a single control made it into the frame. His conclusion was that the film must have been damaged while the prints were being handled, creating bright arcs that just happened to look exactly like the other ones in the photos. These are professionally called kink marks, and the arc would fade at the ends, the way kinks normally do. But Biddle was only ever looking at the photographs. His analysis never went into the bruises that showed up on her body, or the 10 weeks of rotating witnesses going in and out, describing the same lights, or the 25 plus people packed shoulder to shoulder that night, whose accounts had just never changed. To me, the most interesting part about this case is Barry Taff's conclusion. You'd think that the lead investigator, who had been at all of these events and seen it with his very eyes, would call this a paranormal haunting. Except he didn't. His conclusion was that there never was a demon, that Doris was the source of all of this on her own. Her own uncontrolled mind had somehow manifested everything. Parapsychologists like Taff have a term for this. They call it recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis. I guess this theory would explain why, when Doris moved, it followed her. Almost like it was attached to her and slowly fading throughout the years. That's not something a haunted house does. Her old house in Culver City, according to some reports, is still standing. Eventually, Hollywood came calling. Her case became a novel, written by Frank DeFelitta in 1978, and then a film, The Entity, released in 1982, starring Barbara Hershey. Taff served as the technical advisor. Hershey never even met Doris, neither did the director. The film took her story into its own hands, and took it away from Doris forever. Doris Bither passed away in 1995 due to a pulmonary failure, according to her son's interview. In the end, the investigators made their names off this horrific case. A novelist got his bestseller and a filmmaker got her film. And most importantly, in the 50 years of everyone telling her story, no one could explain, not even her own sons, what had happened to Doris Bither. If you guys liked the content, please hit me a like and comment below. Curious with your thoughts on the story. And as always, I post every Wednesday, So if you haven't already checked out my other videos, you can check them out here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next week.